Disclaimer. My discussion of this topic has nothing to do with anything religious, occult, supernatural, spiritual, mystical, or anything like that, even though it's frequently dealt with in those contexts. Instead, I'm approaching this very real psychological phenomenon from a purely intellectual standpoint, which might seem sacrilegious to some people, but I'm a caveman who doesn't believe in anything I can't get my hands on, and it just so happens I've got some neurons wrapped firmly around this one pretty useful function of the brain, and how to tap into it. So what is Gnosis? Background music by Stretch the Songwriter. Intro music by Vopiscus. So what is Gnosis? You'll find a lot of definitions for this word, and that's fine. All words are made up by people, so people are free to stuff them with whatever meanings they want. But in the context of this podcast, you need to understand it from my definition because to me, that word signifies something very specific. I look online and see it confounded with all sorts of visions, hallucinations, near-death experiences, out-of-body and so forth. And I'm not trying to discount the value of any of those, but very little of what I read about had anything to do with what I mean by Gnosis. Let's admit that there's definitely more than one type of profound experience available to us, and hopefully we can agree that each discrete, repeatable type deserves its own name. A lot of these extreme mental states overlap, but Gnosis is always a distinctly recognizable thing, even where it coincides with any others. Every brain is a little different from the next, so extreme states are generally flavored by personality, but the character of Gnosis is universal. There's more than one path to it, but the destination is invariable. This isn't a prejudice I hold, and there's nothing magical or mystical making it the same for everyone. It's just that the word signifies a very specific form of understanding, a form available to anyone capable of abstract thought, and anyone not precisely in that state is simply not in a state of Gnosis, as the definition will soon make clear. There's a relatively rare mental experience, yet common to humans all across time, wherein the individual loses all sense of separation of things and feels at one with the universe, that everything is all a part of the same living organism or machine or dancing oceanic flux. And along with entertaining that perspective, a person tends to be washed over with a sense of peace and acceptance of everything, a feeling that everything is right, that nothing can be wrong, not death or war or sickness or suffering or hatred, perhaps accompanied by a realization that the thought of wrongness itself only arises from the limitations of not being able to see the whole picture, but that all the misunderstandings of short-sightedness are okay too, being just a natural part of the things happening as they're going to. It's a weird crossover between unlimited capacity for total empathy with all beings and an essentially psychopathic detachment from all outcomes. Strange that it doesn't last because it seems rationally adoptable as a philosophy, but listening to it just now, even if you could sincerely find yourself shrugging off all the concerns of personal survival and agreeing fully with that ideological perspective, still wouldn't really get you there, which suggests that the neurochemical state in this case might be the more primary component and the accompanying thoughts simply derivative thereof. Very cool stuff, but this is not Gnosis. Again, not putting Gnosis on a pedestal as something more important than anything else, just saying it's different. Side request, if anyone has a good label for that state just described, let me know in the comments. Satori, perhaps? If you've heard of Gnosis before, you've probably heard of the Gnostics, who started popping up a little before Christianity and then bloomed even more spin-offs soon afterwards. But if you haven't heard the term, it's helpful to understand that I'm not saying agnostic, but just Gnostic, which by a straightforward translation, separate from any historical baggage, is definitionally the opposite because the prefix letter A means without. So it'd be a difference of Gnostic knowing versus agnostic not knowing, if we were being strictly literal about the words. The English word knowledge comes from the Greek gnosis. Somehow we swapped the silent G for a silent K, which is every bit as stupid. Anyway, there wasn't just one religious group called Gnostics. There were tons of them with quite a wide variety of beliefs, and the history is wildly fascinating, but we won't get into it here. All you need to know about them for now is that the common thread between these groups is implied in their choice of name. Gnostics called themselves that not because of what they knew, but because of what they were striving to know. Gnosis was the common goal of every Gnostic sect. The word Gnosis itself precedes any record of Gnosticism. In Plato, the statesman 258e, gnostikos is contrasted against praktikos, being discussed as abstract cognition of things divorced from practical application. Splitting hairs for sure, but it gives us a hint we'll tap into shortly. From that text, which is a dialogue between Socrates and a stranger, it seems safe to say that the word gnosis was originally a pretty ordinary general term, and that the stranger was temporarily assigning it a more specific definition to help get his point across. Fast forward a few hundred years, and the Gnostics have elevated it to religious significance as the highest form of truth. So it's gone from knowledge to abstract knowledge to sacred knowledge. And that last part is where it gets hard to pin down because Gnosticism itself, like the deities and its theologies, splintered off in so many directions that we can't say with any certainty that they'd have agreed with one another about what it was they were actually after. And then as we approach modern times, each of these ideas was absorbed by different esoteric societies, hoarded and guarded and conflated with dozens of unrelated ideas from other mystery cults. But whether formal religions or secret societies, the one thing they all try to do is hold privileged information out of reach as something that has to be earned by successive stages of subservience to the priesthood, teacher, leader, or whatever much fancier title they happen to assume. So insofar as they provide any real path to any secrets of actual value, they make it as long and painstaking as possible so as to retain leverage over the curious. Like I've apparently done on a much smaller timescale in this lengthy build-up. Sorry about that, almost there. Despite all that, there is a distinctive mental state which appears to be a perfectly logical extrapolation from that initial distinction between knowledge of the abstract and the concrete, which resonates neatly with all the Gnostic branches' consensus preference of the so-called spiritual over the physical. Getting down to it, Gnosis is a state of universal understanding wherein any entity or process can stand in as a metaphor for any other, so that knowledge of one thing gives you knowledge of all other things. The sign of its attainment is when you reach the thought, everything is everything, which sounds redundant and meaningless under normal conditions, obviously, but when in this state of intuitive, unrestrained, compulsive analogizing, sounds like the most profound statement possible, because it sums up what's being experienced intellectually. It's an ever-accelerating chain reaction of one metaphor after another, which you can't seem to pause. It's fast-paced, exhilarating, and overwhelming. And unlike the oneness state described before, it's very easy to see why it can't last, because you can't keep your head that far in the clouds of abstraction and still deal effectively with the physical reality around you. You get hit by a car real fast. But there is lasting value in this experience, because you get to keep all the insights you write down. So, like I said, the slowest way there is the religious or occult path, which either involves some cryptic and incomplete instructions for meditation or prayer that might take you decades to fumble through, or else a series of hypnotic rituals for which the followers are made to wait arbitrary lengths of time before being permitted to partake, meanwhile having to memorize the meanings of symbols that different actions and actors in the rituals represent, only to be discarded later because the proper understanding obtained from participation in each ritual is simply the merging of some of these symbols, until, ultimately, every symbol represents every other symbol so that their meanings are all abolished and the mental chain reaction is unlocked. It's a huge waste of time and completely unnecessary. LSD can get you there in half an hour, especially if you go into it with that intention, and I'm pretty sure other psychedelics can pull it off as well. But if you're drug averse or not keen on breaking the law, don't worry. The truth is, despite all these religious hierarchies and symbolic labyrinths and secret messages hidden in intense theological debates, you can just think your way into it. The simplest version of this is to take two entirely unrelated things and start comparing them and trying to see how they're the same. Like how your cat represents the market economy, or how a pencil is the same thing as a bowling ball. You can be as random as you want with your starting points. Clearly, this requires you to get abnormally creative, and just the idea of it sounds exhausting, I know. But it's a mental muscle, and the more times you flex it, the easier it becomes. And in the following episodes of this Gnosis Primer series, I'll just walk you through my own thought process, step by step, and prime your mind for entering the mythical state of Gnosis, in which creativity is pretty much unavoidable. No funny hats or robes required. Hey guys, quick note before I go. I know some of these podcast topics are a little goofy, so if you like the way I think, but you really want to take advantage of the best of what my brain has to offer, look up my books on Amazon or Audible. My first book, Augmenting Willpower, is a field manual for human psychology that emphasizes personal accountability, while my second book, An Idea is Not a Product, is a guide for building routines and systems that force you to put your money where your mouth is. Both titles are available in all formats, so you can listen to the audio on the go, easily search topics by keyword in the ebook, and the paperback fits right in your pocket.